We know the grid is undergoing massive change, which creates massive opportunities for local energy. The Energy Changemakers podcast offers rich conversations with industry leaders to help you and your company capture opportunities to build a decentralized grid. I'm your host, Elisa Wood. Welcome to the Energy Changemakers podcast. Hey everyone, Elisa Wood here from Energy Changemakers. So you've probably noticed that a lot of people who work in the rooftop solar industry are worried that the federal government might do away with a key tax credit. It's called the ITC, or Investment Tax Credit. I recently spoke to Gareth Evans, CEO of VECKTA, about this. And I chose to speak to him because he's looked beyond the noise and the worry out there and done some number crunching on actual commercial projects, places where solar and batteries are being installed for businesses. If the ITC goes away, will these customers still save money on their energy bills? What he found might surprise some people. The answer is yes. Solar can still offer an impressive return without the tax. But, and there is a but, it requires some rethinking of how projects are structured. Gareth explains what that looks like in this podcast. I have to say, I felt good about this conversation. In a time where there's a lot of negative news about green energy, Gareth offers a positive path ahead. Enjoy the interview. So, hey, Gareth, how are you today? Great to have you here on the Energy Changemakers podcast.
Thank you for having me. It's wonderful to be here, and I am very well, thank you.
Great. You know, I've always been fascinated by VECKTA. It's a very interesting company, and I get your newsletter, and I've been listening to your podcast and reading some of your blogs. It's just full of great, interesting content for those who are in the distributed energy business. But I wanted to talk to you about something very specific today. I saw in one of your newsletters that you had done an analysis of the solar ITC and how companies would fare if the solar ITC went away,
Yep.
the federal investment tax credit, and if it remains. So I'd love to talk to you about that today. But before we do, let's get into a little bit about what you do at VECKTA and how it influences the energy transition.
Yeah, well, thanks for the opportunity and excited to talk about the IRA. It's definitely a dynamic space. But here at VECKTA, we are unlocking today what is one of the largest and most significant opportunities of our generation. We are enabling enterprises to own their energy future. And we can talk about why that is important if you'd like. But essentially, we've built a SaaS platform, a marketplace that empowers businesses to rapidly deploy profitable, reliable, and sustainable on-site energy systems, microgrids, distributed energy assets, whatever your favorite term is. And we do that at scale. And so we do this by automating the ability for companies to rapidly assess across their entire portfolio of facilities where on-site energy makes sense. We, in an automated way, help them optimize the right energy system for their specific needs and objectives, considering all commercially viable technologies. And then ultimately, we connect the buyers to a pre-qualified set of suppliers through our marketplace. And we do this to ensure that the customer mitigates their risks and maximizes their value. And our process typically saves our customers in excess of 90% in terms of time and costs in the planning stages, and up to 40% in capital costs or PPA prices using the marketplace.
Very interesting. So you take a lot of the early risk out of the project, it sounds like.
Yes, as you've reported on, soft costs play a significant part of this industry. You know, NREL's study several years ago said up to 70% of project costs are soft costs. And so our platform really automates a lot of what was previously a very manual and Excel-based process. And we use now very smart technologies to look at the hundreds of thousands of variables that actually impact the business case. And we ensure that we place the buyer in control of the process and ensuring that they have the data, the intelligence, and the insights to act with confidence. And they can do that with a minimal barrier to entry in terms of cost, and that they then get the right project outcome that will last them now for the next few decades. So it's all about ensuring that we plan it right but ensure that the right buyers and suppliers are partnered together because these are long-term partnerships.
Well, you had me at get rid of the Excel spreadsheets. So,
Yeah.
okay, great. So let's dive into this topic today. It's a big one. There's just so much uncertainty in the market about the investment tax credit, the ITC. We don't know quite what's going to happen there. I hear positive things, I hear negative things. It changes from day to day. And it's been pretty crucial over the years to the growth of the solar industry. But you took a hard look at what it means kind of beyond the worry. You looked at the actual numbers. So tell me a little bit about, first of all, let's explain to our listeners what is the federal investment tax credit, because we can't assume everybody is deeply involved in understanding the Inflation Reduction Act.
Yeah. So the IRA, or the Inflation Reduction Act, was passed in 2022. This was a flagship initiative of the previous administration. And what it did is it allocated approximately $370 billion towards clean energy technologies, manufacturing, and innovation. And so this legislation was designed to really accelerate private investment into the energy industry, our supply chains, and ensure that the US is in a position of energy sovereignty while also supporting the climate goals, which the government had set at 100% carbon pollution free electricity by 2035, approximately a 50% reduction in economy wide greenhouse gases from 2005 to 2030, and net zero emissions economy wide by 2050. So it's a really bold piece of legislation, and it really, set the scene for the rest of the world. Everyone took note because this was the first, I'd say, commercial enablement of the energy transition versus like the top down stick. This was like the bottom up. Let's drive economics. Let's ensure people are incentivized to deploy projects, build local, gain supply locally as much as possible. And there was lots of incentives around that.
Yeah, I've never seen anything like it before. I was in Canada shortly after it had passed. I was at a conference and I was sort of hearing the other side of the story, the woe and the worry from the other countries because suddenly the US was so aggressively pushing into this space.
Yeah.
So now here we are, not quite sure that we're going to still have this initiative around, or at least pieces of it, much longer. And of course, the investment tax credits are key, and they're not really new to the IRA. They've been around for quite a while. God, I remember, I guess it was the Bush administration had made a big splash when they decided to extend the credits over multiple years, creating some certainty for the industry. But here we are again. So we're kind of like, we don't know what's going to happen with this tax credit. So you decided to do an analysis and you analyzed what it would be, what the economics are of solar without the tax credit and with the tax credit. And
Yeah.
so why did you feel it was important to do this analysis right now?
Yeah. Well, I think to your point, the ITC has been around for a long time. And under the previous regimes, it was like 30%, and then it would step down to 26%. And then I think it was 19, and it would sort of phase out. And it was really set up to turbocharge the industry and support us to deploy more good projects. Under the Inflation Reduction Act, it revitalized the ITC back to a base of 30% tax credits for people who deploy these systems. It even added in, beyond just solar, storage, importantly, for the systems you and I are particularly interested in, as well as other technologies. And then it added in bonuses for energy communities, low incomes, as well as domestic content. So it really, if you played your cards right, you could get in excess of 50% tax credits. And there's definitely, even back under the previous administration, there were attempts to try and kill this. Many attempts, across all aspects of the IRA.
Yeah, I think I saw you somewhere you reported like 17.
Yeah, there was 17 attempts targeting Executive Order 14082, which was the IRA implementation. But then there was like 3 attempts to kill the energy efficiency rebates, 2 on electrical vehicle tax credits. And so certainly the attack against this is not new, but I'm definitely maybe more optimistic than others. I think the Republican leadership has really come out, and I don't know whether you saw the latest Politico reporting, but 21 House Republicans whose districts have drawn billions of dollars from the IRA have now come out and said they are in vehement support of the IRA. They want to ensure that their economies are not threatened because they've thrived under this. Edison Electric Institute just brought 40 companies to Congress last week to argue why the IRA should stick around. So, there's lots of advocacy for the IRA. I think, obviously, worst case scenario, it disappears altogether. I think the middle ground would be to return to a step down approach. And best case scenario, it survives as is. And yeah, I'm happy to talk through the analysis that we completed on a few different projects.
Yeah, and just before you get into that, I want to point out real quickly, too, that part of the reason the Republicans are supporting this is because the IRA is sending a lot of money to the red states in particular. I just saw a map recently, and it's really lopsided. I mean, that's where the money's going. So it makes sense for them to support it.
Yeah, the American Clean Power Group did a study and they found that the IRA will spur $3.8 trillion worth of net spending in the US. And that was a 4x return on taxpayer investment. So it's a really good deal. And I think more and more people are realizing that it is super positive for the economy. And it doesn't matter what color your state is, it's generated a lot of amazing outcomes, not only in the deployment of energy systems, but the investment in advanced manufacturing, new EV facilities, new solar production facilities, as well as supply chains, mining and transportation and more. So it has been incredible.
Yeah, it really has been. Of course, we're living in strange times. So let's talk about what could happen. It could go away entirely.
Yep.
And that's what you looked at. What if it goes away entirely? And
Yep.
what companies do? What does it mean? What's the loss? And it's interesting. I'll give away the punchline here, and that is that you actually found that solar still offers a very good proposition, even without the tax credit. But there are some caveats there. So anyway, I'm going to let you talk now. Tell us about your analysis.
Yeah, I love it. Yeah, we actually looked at two middle of the road projects because we didn't want to try and, skew it by looking at really incredible projects with or without. And so we looked at two middle of the road projects in a variety of states. And so one example was a 789 kilowatt solar system with a 1.5 megawatt hour battery. And this was a system that with the ITC, assuming only a 30% ITC, just to be conservative, it was a really nice project. It had a very positive net present value of $727,000. It had an IRR of 15%, and it could pay for itself in a little under 6 years. But then when you removed the ITC under that scenario and kept the size of the system exactly the same, the economics were destroyed. So the net present value dropped from over the 700,000 to a little over $100,000. The IRR decreased from 15% to 11%, and the payback increased from 6 years to 9 years. And so this now became a really bad project. So what we wanted to show is that companies should not just stick to, the way the industry has typically worked is a developer will approach you as a customer and say, you've got a massive roof, let's fill your roof with solar and let's deploy this system. And, if we stick with that mindset and we don't optimize the systems for their specific needs and objectives and to maximize the financial returns, then we run into the situations like the one I described. On the flip side, we then looked at a second project, which was slightly larger. It was a 1.7 megawatt solar system with a 6,000 kilowatt hour battery. And with the ITC, this became a $6 million capital investment project. That was the optimized system. It had a 19% IRR. It had a 4.5-year payback, and it generated $28 million worth of savings over 25 years, which is amazing. So with the ITC, incredible project. So then we said for exactly the same facility, exactly the same utility tariffs, if the ITC went away, would the system stay the same? And what the optimization engine found was it would downgrade the size of the system to protect the financial viability of the project. So it reduced the size from 1.7 megawatts to 1.4 megawatts, and it almost halved the size of the battery from 6,000 kilowatt hours to 3,500. That became a $4 million capital investment, but it protected the financial economics. So the customer would still receive $25 million worth of savings over 25 years. The IRR would drop a little bit from 19% to 14%, And the payback period, because you're not collecting those tax credits up front, would go from 4 years to 7 years. But an incredible project. And I think, to your point before, the punchline is, let's make sure that we look at every project on its own merit, and let's ensure that we're considering all the variables today. And so whether tariffs on equipment come in, whether the IRA disappears, we need to factor all of that into our analyses to ensure that we are deploying these systems to maximize the financial returns on investment, as well as what other stackable benefits the customer wants to achieve, resilience, emission reduction. But I think what this demonstrates is when we do that, there are still so many incredible projects without the ITC because the cost of energy is going up so significantly, and because power outages are becoming more of a problem. These systems economically pencil today, the ITC becomes icing on the cake, as it were.
And this project, this 1.7 or 1.4 megawatt, depending on whether we're with or without ITC, what might the application be for this? What kind of business, for example, might want a system of that size?
Yeah, in this case, it was a big box store that we ran the analysis on. And so it was for purely cost management. So the battery was designed to reduce peak demand costs as well as shift so that they weren't consuming during the high time of use tariff periods. And that's what generates those very significant energy cost savings. So there are definitely applications where in this case it's purely just cost. In other scenarios where customers are looking at power quality issues or power outage problems, it may be solar and storage, but now maybe there might be a gas turbine for backup or a fuel cell. So these are all the variables we want to consider. We truly need to understand what is the company's business driver, what are their local constraints, what are the market conditions, what are the incentives available, and then optimize around all of those variables to maximize the return on investment. But we're seeing this across the board. We're seeing grocery stores, warehouses, cold chain logistics, manufacturing, all the way through the supply chain. This applies to everyone, but it's very location and utility centric because there is so much variability in terms of the utility tariffs that impact these systems.
Can you tell me what state this project would be in?
We ran two. The last one was in California. The first one, I believe, was Illinois.
Okay. So states that generally have sort of favorable policies towards solar.
Yes.
Yeah. It's interesting. Two things come to mind. First of all, is that these projects aren't simple, and there's a lot of different ways to manage the finances of the projects, from how you actually literally finance it to how you're basically playing with the grid, whether you're reducing demand or what you're doing.
Yep.
So there's a lot of complexity here that I think sometimes when we talk in a very simple fashion about, oh, we're going to lose 30% on the ITC, we don't think about the complexity that goes into these projects when they're looked at on an individual basis like this.
That's right.
The downside that keeps hitting me, though, is I'm looking at something like that. It's so hard to scale, isn't it, with solar and batteries when you don't have a replicable model. It depends on the state. It depends on the utility programs. It depends on net metering. It's just not a simple industry, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, and that's genuinely why we created VECKTA. And so what happens in our platform now, we've made it simple because with just an address and an industry type, our platform then pulls up to 5,000 different data points for that particular facility anywhere in the country. And in fact, many places around the world. And we are already able to run an optimization on all of those facilities. So our biggest customer today has 18,000 sites in the platform. They can run in minutes an analysis on all 18,000 sites to determine where they get the greatest return on investment. And so then what they're then able to do is if the IRA did disappear, we'd then adjust that in the platform and rerun the entire analysis and see what impact that would have.
Interesting. Are you finding that when these customers are coming to you, they have particular concerns? And is one of them, are we going to lose the ITC?
It's almost always my energy bills have gone up significantly. How do I get this under control? And, I think the smartest customers are thinking, while there's free money at the table, how do I maximize the IRA?
Mhm.
For sure. If you can be getting 30 to 50 cents on the dollar back for your investment, and this system becomes your greatest insurance policy because it saves you money while it's not used, and then it can be used for backup or emission reduction when it is being used. Like these are incredible investments. The IRA makes them even more incredible. But when the IRA goes away, there will be bad projects. And so the key is to make sure as an industry, we don't pursue those bad projects. And we see a lot of people wasting time and energy trying to make bad projects work. There are so many good ones. Let's prioritize them.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I'd say in order of priority, our customers is always cost preservation, then resilience, then sustainability. Sustainability is obviously a nice byproduct, but we haven't yet seen customers invest at the expense of cost for sustainability.
Very interesting. I was just reading an article this morning. It was S&P Global saying that they had found that in earnings calls, the word sustainability was being used 75% less,
Yeah.
which is fascinating. And what I'm finding when I'm talking to people is that they're using different terms to describe it. For one thing, they're using the term security or resilience. They're kind of like
Yeah.
blurring those lines between those different things. Based on your experience, even if CEOs aren't talking about sustainability in their earnings calls, it doesn't make a lot of difference because that's not what's really motivating these projects anyway.
No, we definitely encourage our customers to use the opportunity to market and brand. And it's definitely proven that the companies that are more sustainable have greater employee retention, their sales cycles are shorter, and they retain their customers longer, their share price is better. So there's lots of reasons why making sustainable investments is the smart business thing to do. But it is also, a nice byproduct of making a very positive investment in your business to manage your costs and manage your operational continuity. And I think we're going to see that operational continuity become more and more important. I don't know whether you saw the American Society of Civil Engineers just released their 4-year report, and it gave the grid a D plus rating down from a C minus.
Oh boy, it's always bad. Every year when that comes out, it's bad, but it's getting worse.
Yeah, and it's getting worse. And I think we're seeing more power quality issues. So the latest data shows that if your utility bill is, say, $1,000, add 7% to that, and that is the cost of you having to replace equipment as a result of power quality issues. And then power outages are devastating for businesses because they lose production, they lose equipment, they lose the ability to produce product. So I think while resilience is number 2 today, I think very quickly it'll become number 1 just to keep the lights on. But, to the sustainability conversation, we just ran an experiment with our partners, Quantum Energy, where we wanted to start humanizing some of this data. So we looked at a 750 kilowatt project out in Georgia, and this was for a hospital group. And their mission is to literally save lives. And we were able to show through this small solar investment that it would save 28 years of life. It would protect 0.06 species and create $7.5 million worth of economic value to their community because they'd reduce the emissions, the impacts on air quality, soil quality, water quality. And with that data, this is scientifically backed data, we can start humanizing some of these metrics. And so I think the more we can shift sustainability into tangibles, it becomes very powerful. Trying to sell someone on a ton of carbon reduced, it's very intangible. We can't even comprehend what that is. But if we can save 3 years of life for our 10 closest friends by making this investment, that actually now starts becoming super interesting.
That's fascinating. This has always been a problem for the industry trying to explain resilience in particular, right? Numerically, what is the value of resilience and what is the value of sustainability? So interesting report.
Yeah. And resilience is also quantifiable. And I think more and more businesses are realizing this. The cost of an outage can be quite devastating. I'll read off. I've got a few of the stats. It says the auto industry manufacturing can lose up to $3 million an hour. The manufacturing industry in general, $260,000 an hour. Healthcare, $630,000 an hour. So if you can factor these into the likelihood of an outage, when we pull data, we also look at the outage risks for areas. So what have been the historical risks? We're going to start putting some intelligence into projecting what the outage risks will be in the future and the likely duration. You could then apply that to the hourly impact for the industry. And if you're now suffering $1 to $3 million an hour outage, it doesn't take very many outages to pay for this system. Like one outage pays for one system, and that's the value that we can all derive for the industry.
And did you calculate resilience into your solar analysis? That $25 million in savings?
No, that isn't even included. That's just the pure utility cost savings. We just supported a biotech company actually in San Diego. They were suffering power outages, and because they take skin samples for cancer assessments, they couldn't afford to lose those samples, because imagine going back to your customers and asking them to take another skin graft. That's not a good day out. And so they actually spent over a year trying to find a developer who would do a solar and battery system to provide them a day-long power outage resilience. And no one would support them. They were told batteries were too expensive, or they were only solar. And literally within 3 months, we were able to take in their data, design the system for them, which will save them $3.5 million over the next 20 years, provide an entire day resilience through an outage to protect their samples. It's a solar and storage system, and it was contracted after comparing 5 competitive quotes in our marketplace. So that's the value of the process: is meet the customers where they're at, make sure you design the system for their specific objectives, and then connect them with the best developers in the market to get these projects built.
I was just reading an EIA report that said on-site solar among manufacturers increased something like 125%. I was astonished on the one hand, because that's a big number, and it's manufacturers. It's not hospitals or universities, where we tend to hear a lot more interest in distributed energy or resilience. Manufacturers, obviously, the resilience is important to them, and they must be seeing cost savings too, because I don't think they would do that if they weren't.
Yep.
In their tough margin business. So you sound pretty optimistic. I hear a lot of people who are disheartened and discouraged right now, feeling like we're moving into a difficult period for distributed energy. But I'm picking up from you that you're still pretty positive.
I think genuinely the market is coming to anyone in this industry. I think it doesn't matter how much we invest in the oil and gas industry, how much we try and push for coal and gas and nuclear power plants to be brought online. The reality is the grid is completely broken. It's underinvested in. We cannot get energy to where it's needed, especially in a period of increasing demand. And the only way for businesses to manage their costs, continue to operate without any impacts, and reduce their emissions is with on-site energy systems. And so even if the IRA disappeared tomorrow, the market is massive. There are so many good projects. And the pain point for customers is just getting worse with every day that passes. And so I'm hugely optimistic. It's super exciting times. I think the market is really coming to us.
Wonderful. Well, on that very positive note, I'm going to close out now. Thank you so much. This was a really interesting discussion, and I am going to be carefully watching your blog and podcast in the weeks and months to come.
Love it. It's been a pleasure to be here, and I look forward to next time.
Wonderful. Thank you for joining us today on the Energy Changemakers podcast. I hope today's conversation has inspired you to think differently about the role of distributed energy in our society. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to our podcast on your favorite platform and consider leaving us a review. You can help us shape the dialogue around energy. Go to energychangemakers.com, subscribe to our newsletter, and join our community. Together, we can make a real difference in how quickly we can make our grid local, equitable, and clean.